abolition is important because all the injustices that lead to these things are intertwined. And we can't always see them clearly from positions of privilege. Oh, we're 10 days into 2026, and I already want to cancel my subscription. I've had it with the trial period. I'm done. I don't need the rest of this year. But this week did reinforce for me the importance of being an abolitionist. I not only want to abolish ICE, I want to abolish fascist authoritarianism and government by content creation and social media influencing, instead of government by law and reason and kindness. And I'm sick of violence as a response. I'm sick and tired of the militarization of everything in our society. I could do with abolishing those. I've beyond had it with poverty and capitalism and want to abolish both of them. There is absolutely no reason at this point in human history that every single human being on this planet cannot be fed, housed, educated, and cared for when sick or injured. Full stop. I've had it up to my old white male cis hetero eyeballs with patriarchy, hierarchy, and cis heteronormativity. And I would like to abolish all of them. I'm exhausted by cruelty for its own sake and using captivity and bondage as punishment, and want to abolish them. I'm not naive. I am not seeking some fantasy world, some utopia where everything is going to be perfect, because no human society will ever be perfect. I am convinced, however, to the depths of my soul, that we can certainly do better than we're doing right now. We do not have to settle for atrocity, gross injustice, and massive iniquity. I'm going to consider myself an abolitionist and work towards abolishing those things that work against the power of love and our Unitarian Universalist values. When you hear the word abolition, I'm going to wager that most of us, as was true for me for a long time, you hear abolition, you immediately think of the 19th century American social movement to end slavery. And Unitarians and Universalists were very well involved in that movement. Theodore Parker, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Elhanan Winchester, Lydia Marie Child, William Lloyd Garrison, Lucy Stone, Aidan Ballou, the list goes on and on. But before we get too puffed up with our ancestors, we should also remember that not all Unitarians and Universalists nor their ministers were abolitionists. In fact, a lot of the Unitarians were people of the moneyed classes, both new and old money, on the eastern seaboard in the cities, and a lot of their wealth came either from the slave trade or indirectly benefited by the production of materials for various trades by slave labor in the American South. In the South, we had a lot of Unitarians and Universalists and clergy who were not abolitionists. And throughout history, we, like any other group in this country, have had our heroes who were on the right side of history and our not so great ancestors who were on the wrong side of history. And we know that the abolition of slavery following the Civil War didn't abolish slavery in practice. From the original Jim Crow laws to the new Jim Crow of the school to prison pipeline, still lingers on. So when we talk about abolition today, what if we talked about it in a sense that went beyond a 19th century anti-slavery movement for abolition? What if abolition included abolishing all the inhumane ways we treat each other? What if abolition meant doing away with all the systems of oppression and injustice? The Unitarian Universalist Association is currently undertaking what we call, in our great wordy UU way, a study action issue. Basically, what it means is a topic for learning, leading up to a vote of the whole association in 2028 on the issue of abolition and should we become an officially abolitionist faith tradition. And the study action issue views abolition as the term is currently being used in human rights circles. The study action issue says abolition is a holistic approach to systemic social change that includes, but is not limited to, the abolition of slavery, replacing systems and cultures of violence, coercion, and control with transformative justice and relational practices, and dismantling the prison industrial complex as we know it. It requires the transformation of our society and the replacement of theologies of retribution, justice, and violence. Given that definition, I can say I want to be an abolitionist. And I bring this before you because we're just in the early phase of this. And as Unitarian Universalists, this is one of the things that all Unitarian Universalists right now are being called to explore. Were any of you caught off guard by the ditching of the 7 principles? Okay. So we are basically 3 months in to the study action issue and abolition over a 3-year period. You are being informed right at the beginning. So we're going to do our part to stay alert and aware to what's going on in our larger association. So abolition, as we're trying to understand it, is a way to think about how all of our many social justice commitments are intertwined, how they intersect with each other, and how working to combat one injustice is working to combat all injustice because they're all so intertwined. Approaching abolition as a holistic approach to social change has a lot of implications. Not only does it include things like solidarity with Black Lives Matter, but it calls us to oppose openly and vocally, and with our bodies if necessary, the secret police tactics of ICE. Work for justice for immigrants. Abolition calls us to rethink our policing and prison system. Abolition calls us to fight apartheid and genocide wherever they may be happening. Abolition calls us to address poverty and economic inequality. And also to work for a social order that is actually informed by our values with love at the center. And step 1 in dealing with abolition is taking a look at, understanding how we are all in some ways perpetuating the worst of oppressive systems and how we're all in this web that we need to learn to extract ourselves from to be better abolitionists and create a better future. And this is not about being guilty. It's about comprehending the depth of the water we swim in and some of the things we don't notice and how hard it is to be aware of some things. How embedded in the atmosphere, the air we breathe, are some of the systems and injustices. So looking at abolition and studying it is going to help us find and fix more of our blind spots and help us, as they say, wake up a little bit more. because I'd rather be woke than asleep. It's a simple symbolism. It really is. So you knew you couldn't go another sermon without hearing about Portugal, right? So the most emotionally powerful place I visited in Portugal last summer was the Mercado de Escravos, the slave market. The site in Lagos, Portugal, on the utmost southwest coast, where the very first kidnapped Africans were sold into slavery in Europe in 1444. Whew. Like anybody else, I'm proud of who I am and my background. And you know me, I like being Portuguese. I'm proud of being Portuguese. My ancestors started the transatlantic slave trade. Dummies. You know, Diego Cao sailed up the Congo River in 1484. Bartolomeo Diaz sailed around the Cape of Good Hope. 1491, Vasco da Gama sails all the way from Europe to India in 1498. But before that, Nuno Tristão and Antônio Gonçalves brought 14 Berbers from North Africa and sold them as slaves in Portugal. And then a couple of years later, Lanzarote de Freitas and 5 other captains of ships kidnapped 235 people in Western Africa and brought them to Lagos and sold them as slaves in the Mercado de Escravos. This museum was a powerful experience. It's one of the most, I think, creative museums I've ever been to. It's like any museum, full of displays and historical pieces of learning and things mounted that you can read and things that are visual and a couple videos and all kinds of stuff. And you walk in and it's kind of set up into 2 different kind of compartments. One is an exhibit of the history of the Portuguese/European enslavement of people from Africa. And the other, smaller, is a look at what that experience was like from the point of view of the enslaved Africans, including leaders of slave revolts and different other things. So I'm going to stay with the European majority part of the exhibit for a minute. Can we get that picture? I want to show you this picture because that's the front of the museum, and that's me in the museum taking a picture of an exhibit. Every single exhibit in this part of the museum was mounted and placed in such a way that the information was either written on incredibly reflective, shiny black stone or set up in glass in some way that no matter where you looked at it or how you looked at it from, it showed you your reflection. You're getting it, right? Took me a minute while I was there. I was trying to get a good picture of a couple of the things, and I couldn't get a good picture. I kept showing up in the reflection, and then it hit me, and I was like, "Oh!" And I could see the docent over in the corner going, "Got it." Like, takes me a while. I'm a slow learner, but I learned, and it hit me. It was designed that way. It was designed so that white European people looking at that history cannot escape the fact of being involved and connected to it. Powerful. Stunned me. I think Tuesday and I had the quietest lunch of the entire trip after we left this place. We were just floored. The museum said, here's the reality of what slavery was like. You know what? And here you are. What do you think? What might you have done differently? Would you have? What are you doing now? Now, granted, if people of color are in that part of the exhibit, that's going to hit differently. But that part of the exhibit was designed for white Europeans. And boy, does it work. And it also struck me that it was a hard history to learn. And that one of the reasons this museum exists, it's not that old. It's not even, I think, 20 years old. One of the reasons this museum exists is because Portugal had a fascist authoritarian dictator from the 20s to the 1970s. And one of the things they did during that time is they kind of just erased all the difficult things of Portuguese history from their history lessons. Where have I heard this before? Oh yeah, we're doing it right now. So why is this important? Because if you erase things, people don't know how to deal with current problems. They don't know where they come from. They don't see the blind spots. They can't create justice if they don't see the history that leads up to the present to imagine the future. These are the things reflecting on abolition are designed to help us ponder. You know, Renee Good was not the first person killed by ICE in the streets of America, but she was the first white woman. James Reeb was not the first person killed during the American Civil Rights Movement, but he was the first white man of note being a minister. And it's still taking us to get to that point before we all kind of sit up. There have been at least 14 shootings during the ICE raids. This week was Renee Good. The next day was Yerlenis Barcebas Zambrano Contreras and Luis David Nino Morcada in Portland, both now hospitalized and shot. Silverio Villegas Gonzalez in Franklin Park, Illinois, fatally shot picking up his kids from school. Keith Porter, African American, Inglewood, California, fatally shot outside his apartment on New Year's Eve by an off-duty ICE agent. Jaime Alanis Oxnard, a California farm worker, died of injuries sustained during the raid of his farm. Roberto Carlos Montoya Valdez Monrovia, California, struck by an ICE vehicle, later died. Marimar Martinez, fatally shot by ICE in October as he was warning neighbors that ICE was coming into the neighborhood. Huban Shi died in ICE custody after being injured during an ICE raid in September. Abelard Ayevanda Delgado died in transit from the police station to an ICE detention center, and 32 others have died in ICE custody. There have been more deaths in ICE custody since the beginning of 2025 than there were in 1 year period since 2004. We know Renee Good was murdered in broad daylight by an agent of the United States government for no justifiable reason. And there will be no accountability, at least not right now, because the FBI is not sharing any evidence with the state investigators in Minnesota. So not only was she the victim of the gunshots that killed her, she's the victim of a lying propaganda machine set up specifically to change the story. I mean, it is right out of 1984 where the Ministry of Truth goes back and changes the history retroactively. This is what we're dealing with right now. According to the government, Renee Good, who was a peaceful protester, was a radical, violent insurrectionist. Not true. You know, black and brown people have been telling us ever since that they are targeted and killed with no accountability. This is it. This is the thing. So we may finally get more people to get it. Abolition is important because all the injustices that lead to these things are intertwined. And we can't always see them clearly from positions of privilege. The reason now for not investigating Renee Good's murder is that she was an undesirable, a radical leftist. ICE's jurisdiction is immigration enforcement, period. Not traffic stops, not anything else. So what we have right now is the government claiming if you disagree with us and get in the way, it's okay to dispose of you. That's where we're at. I know that's scary, but we are not powerless. It's one of the reasons we study abolition is we learn how to abolish and fight back. We're not becoming a fascist police state. We officially are one. And the Unitarian Universalist Association is asking us to learn about abolition and to become like the 19th century abolitionists who not only spoke but acted to change the reality they were facing. And abolition is possible. There are things we can do from both a personal and systemic standpoint. The new year began with starting a war in Venezuela and with ICE murdering people in the street. But it also began with Avello in New Haven agreeing not to fly people to detention camps anymore. It also began with Zoran Mamdani being sworn in as mayor of New York. And his campaign and his election and the reality of his being mayor in New York is significant, not just in New York, but I think for American politics and important for our moment historically right now, because he ran on and intends to govern as the most socialist democratic elected official in New York City's history. More interested in justice and democracy than virtually, I would say, any of his predecessors. And he's important not because he's a perfect politician or he's going to have all the right answers or he's some kind of savior, but because what he's trying to do actually represents trying to govern by the values we say we believe in, even when they get difficult. He's trying to govern New York City by our best values, through us being our best selves. There's no guarantee he's going to have success. Like all people in his position, there'll be some successes and some failures, no doubt. But it's the way he's going about it. He has revoked all executive orders from Mayor Adams from the date when Adams was charged officially with bribery and fraud. He was sworn in with his hand on the Quran. And in a time where DEI and erasing the history and eliminating diversity and inclusion is trying to be happening everywhere, his administration actually is as diverse and inclusive as New York City itself. Amazing. It's not that hard to do if we want to do it. And if we're brave enough to say, whatever the consequences, we're doing it this way. We're going to go by our values. We're not going by these old values anymore. Look where it's gotten us. They don't work. The way out of our present situation is not to replace MAGA white nationalist fascists with Democrats and go back to the neoliberalism we had going on before. It's about finding a new way of doing things, of going forward based on the best of human values and the best of human community, together as one people made up of diverse people of all kinds, kind of like a UU congregation and microcosm. We want to do the macrocosm now. And we know from living in congregational life that just because you're striving to be inclusive and do things a different way, it's not always smooth. Nothing's going to be. We're human beings. But we can do better than we're doing right now, and we can do it. Through June and over the next 2 years, we're going to periodically talk about abolition and various aspects of it on Sunday morning. I'm periodically going to offer things like a book group or a discussion session or something now and then on different topics. And among the things the Unitarian Universalist Association is asking us to look at, and there's long lists, but just some of them that they're asking us to look at and ponder is, how does our theology centering on love ask us to respond to systems that are based on punishment, revenge, violence, coercion, and dehumanizing people? If we are centered in love, we can't disappear people without due process. That's worth fighting for. What does it mean to proclaim a theology that no one, no matter what they have done or even been accused of doing, is disposable and okay to dehumanize? Even the person who shot Renee Good? has a human story that makes his story tragic. He actually was harmed by a moving vehicle, which leads you to say, how come someone with such trauma is in the field in a place where this can affect other people? But it reminds us of love at the center, that that person is a very hurt person, because only people hurt that bad can hurt others that bad. We can go about healing instead of punishment if we want to do it a different way. The UUA is asking us, what's our response to atrocities like the US-sponsored concentration camp in El Salvador? What's our response to human trafficking? What's our response to the enslavement of incarcerated people, which is still technically legal in the Constitution? The amendment that bars slavery says except for punishment of a crime. No, you can't make someone a slave just because they committed a crime, because pretty soon your crime can be being a violent terrorist, radical leftist insurrectionist, and now we can enslave you. The UUA is asking us to rethink policing in prisons. Black and brown people have been trying to get our attention about this since, well, forever since again. What if we tried to find out what the truth of a situation was? What if we tried to be fair? What if we made our systems of justice and accountability about healing and reconciliation and restoration and actual making amends? And this type of changing our policing and prison system is not a fantasy. If you caught it this week in her press conference following Renee Good's murder this week, Rochelle Bilal, sheriff for the city and county of Philadelphia, modeled this kind of thing for us. What it might look like when she said, no law enforcement professional wears a mask, none, no one, period. Those that come into our communities wearing a mask come to commit crime. Law enforcement professionals do not shoot at vehicles. Not saying fleeing, because she wasn't fleeing, she was getting out of the way. I call these people false, made-up, wannabe law enforcement people. Because what they do is not only against the law legally, but against the moral law. Real law enforcement professionals around the country, she said, have been fighting for years to build the bridge between us and the community. There are ways to do this differently. Some of the things we, as Unitarian Universalists in a congregation, might be called to in exploring how to be abolitionists are partnerships with state advocacy networks seeking to make change on a statewide level. Such as the new Connecticut UU Social Justice Ministry that was gotten off the ground by Sarah Marie Gerfeo and Margaret Henderson and Nancy Burton from Meriden. Yay us! We're already working on number one. We didn't even start yet. Ministry to and with incarcerated people. Is there a prison anywhere around here? Oh, there's one in town, you said. So right there, next door is our neighbor with an opportunity for the second thing. Oh, and they're asking us to have partnerships for food justice. And we collected food for what today? And we had people who go where and work and help? Dorothy Day, right? We're 3 for 3. That's pretty good. This is lining up perfectly for us. Exploring this issue of abolition is important because we want to live out our faith commitments. We want to live these values, even if it seems difficult or something that is hard for us to do. What you believe matters, but how you practice those things you believe matters more. If there's no depth and substance to the practice of your own Unitarian Universalism, then practice of any religion, including yours, becomes like J.D. Vance claiming Catholicism. Vance blaming Renee Good for her own death is like when Martin Luther King said they want to blame the crucified for the crucifixion. Writing in the National Catholic Reporter this week, John Grosso says that for Vance, Catholicism seems to be little more than a political prop, a tool only for his career ambitions and desire for power. As a Catholic, Vance should know better than to peddle gaslighting and agitation. His repeated attempts to blame Renee Good for her own death are fundamentally incompatible with the gospel. Vance knows that lying and killing are sins. Vance knows he does not care. It's important we reflect on and practice abolition because we practice our faith. It doesn't just become something that somehow is a prop. Reflecting deeply on abolition is one of the ways our larger association of congregations is asking us now to live and practice being a Unitarian Universalist. Reflecting on abolitionism and the invitation it offers us not only to oppose intertwined injustices and oppressions, but to work on creating alternatives centered in love is both appropriate and timely. Abolition is about living our values. Renee Good's wife, Becca, said this week, rejecting hate and choosing compassion, turning away from fear and pursuing peace, refusing division and knowing we must come together to build a world where we all come home safe to the people we love. The new abolition movement is a great fit for Unitarian Universalist values and a guide for taking action in the world based on those values. So I invite you in the coming months and over the next 3 years to take this journey into abolitionism with me, Reverend Sierra Marie, and each other.
Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.